Welcome to the Black Writer Studio, a podcast presented by the Hurston Wright Foundation and hosted by Dr. Khadijah Ali Coleman. The Black Writer Studio is dedicated to showcasing Black writers who are transforming the world today with their literary pen and creating a legacy for the culture. Ron Kavanaugh is a literary activist. He is the founder of the Literary Freedom Project, a nonprofit that supports the literary arts through education, creative thinking, and new media. In 1998, the Literary Freedom Project launched Mosaic Literary Magazine, a print triannual that explores the literary arts by writers of African descent and features interviews, essays, and book reviews. The Hurston Wright Foundation honors Ron Kavanaugh with the Madam C.J. Walker Award, recognizing exceptional innovation in supporting and sustaining Black literature. This special edition of the Black Writers Studio is hosted by Troy Johnson, speaker, writer, and president of AALBC.com, home of the oldest, largest, and most frequently visited website dedicated to books written by or about people of African descent.
Brother Ron.
Hey man,
Ron,
how you doing?
Ron Kavanaugh. It's good to talk to you, man. It's interesting because I've known you we went to high school together.
Yeah,
Same high school, Brooklyn Tech.
yeah.
Graduated, I guess it's 42 years ago.
42
Got that right?
years. Sadly, you are right.
Sadly. But interestingly, I didn't know you there.
Yeah.
And I always tell how we met. We met online, and I discovered your website back in 1998. So what year did you actually start it?
I started playing around with this new thing called the internet in like 95. I had wanted to start an actual like a pamphlet for Black readers that would feature upcoming books. There would be like maybe 8 pages and maybe have 10 books in it. And that did not work out. So I started hearing about this thing called the World Wide Web. And so this is 95. And it looked like I could jump on there and get my own website going and do what I wanted to do in print, but now do it digitally or virtually. So I taught myself HTML. So this is before WordPress, this is before Squarespace. You had to know code, you had to really know coding back then. And I just like studied different, there was only a few websites. And it's interesting because people forget now that the internet was really AOL back then. Like AOL had all of the features and everything. There wasn't like this formal sort of presence that the internet now has with all these different websites sort of residing on the internet. You went to AOL, back then. So there wasn't much in the way of websites. There wasn't much in the way of everything that we consider part of the internet now. But I was able to teach myself enough HTML to get a website going. And I always had the idea of using the term or the word mosaic. And someone else suggested to me, somebody who I was working with, hey, why don't you call it mosaicbooks.com? And I was like, what? Like when he first said it, didn't even make sense to me. But I said, all right, I'll call it mosaicbooks.com. Every domain was available back then. It wasn't like you had to worry too much. Like, if you came up with a name, there was a web browser already already in existence called Mosaic, which was completely separate from what I was doing. And I tried to get that name, and it was taken already, obviously. So Mosaic Books was the next best thing. And this is now like 96. So officially mosaicbooks.com started in 1996.
Now, at the time, did you really appreciate how visionary that was? I mean, you were hopping on the web at a time where most people didn't have internet access, or perhaps didn't even know what it was.
Or had a computer for that matter. You know, most people still didn't even have computers in their homes, you know. So don't ask me why I went and bought a computer to begin with. You know, I mean, I was always like, you know, interested, somewhat tech inclined, but I didn't have like a strong sense of why I needed a computer, you know, in my home. But I knew that having a computer was like the, you know, like the foundation to sort of exploring the internet, and again, then AOL. So I was able to finally figure out how to get a website up and going. And mind you, no such thing as social media. There's no such thing as social media. Social media is what you did when you left your house and you hung out with your friends. That was social media back then. But quickly it caught on. Within a couple of years, I was in the New York Times, I was in Essence, Black Enterprise listed me, and that's when people reached out to me and was like, Ron, your website is in Black Enterprise Magazine. And they were less small mentions, like, you know, 10 favorite Black websites and things like that. They were all small mentions, but they were still mentions. And I felt like the New York Times did this is crazy, like the New York Times did a piece on me, didn't even call me, didn't ask me any questions about what I was doing, how I did it. They just kind of visited the website and asked and answered their own questions and called it a day. And I just discovered it, like I know it was like Black History Month. And I discovered it just like looking through the newspaper that way. So it was catching on, definitely catching on, but there was still no context early on in those early days to say like, oh, I'm doing something substantive, you know, that will that will last and people will be attracted to it. Because in the beginning, you know, I was always a lifelong reader. It wasn't accidental, it was intentional, you know, that I did this. I was trying to find a way to promote Black literature. So I just didn't sort of like stumble upon this. I was trying to promote the books that I was reading and the books that I was really like sort of gravitating towards.
That's interesting. It raises a couple of questions. So by 1996, you had this website, but your interest in Black books predated that basically by your entire life. How was the environment, the Black book environment back in 1996 in terms of the number of books, the diversity, the variety of titles being published? What was the environment like back then?
Yeah, I mean, it was a little different, and also my interests were different. So I was like more interested in like classic books by Black authors, sort of well-known Black authors. There wasn't so much the romance novels, the gangster sort of fiction came in a little later. What I remember most is, and one of the reasons what led me down this path is there weren't many Black-owned bookstores. There were, I mean, you know, we're kind of going through I'll use that word in quotes, a renaissance now, but there was Black Books Plus back then, there was Inkiru Books, like those were my two, and this is the 90s. Those were like my two go-to bookstores, particularly Black Books Plus, because it was, I'm in the Bronx, and that bookstore was like on like 95th Street in Amsterdam or Columbus, something like that. So it's relatively close to me. So I used to go to that bookstore quite often. And that is where I realized that something else was needed for readers like myself who entered bookstores but did not know what to read next. And that led me to want to start a little brochure, which also led me to start mosaicbooks.com. Again, the whole sort of basic idea of how do we let people, readers particularly, know what books and what good books are out there and available to them. Because that's the biggest, even to this day, that's like one of the biggest challenges. I mean, like AALBC fills this void. I try to fill it. What to read next? So you finish one or two books and you don't have a good grasp of what to read next. So that's kind of led us both down this sort of same path.
Right, and I'll continue on with our story of how we met, because it's a perfect segue into, you mentioned a couple of bookstores, Black Books Plus and Kuru. And you also mentioned the idea about, determining what to read next. So you as a bookseller, you promoted other bookstores, physical bookstores. And in fact, you published a list of other bookstores, and many people would think, why would a bookseller promote other bookstores? And so when I discovered your list, I wanted to share it, for the same reasons. You can elaborate on that if you like. But when I saw your list, I emailed you, didn't know who you were, and said, hey man, you mind if I take this list and publish it on ALBC.com? And you said in the email, and I quoted you, it may still be up on the site somewhere, this list must be shared. And I'm like, immediately, like, this brother gets it. It's not, it's purely, we're just trying to help. And so I took that list and I've published it, and it actually is still on the web.
I know,
and it's evolved a great deal. And in 2020, it was shared widely across the net. But so I went into Kuru one day, and this had to have been in what, 99, 2000, 98, was it?
98, 99, somewhere
probably
around there.
Late 98, maybe early 99 and so I went into Kuru, and there's a brother named Aaron behind the desk, and I was introducing him to to my new website. And it's just interesting to think that I'm a bookseller going to a bookstore and asking him how, what can you do to help me? And that seems odd to do that now, but back in those days, it was, the environment was a bit different. But at any rate, he said to me, you know what, you need to meet this brother right here. And then and it was you. And I was like, oh man, I already know this guy. And that kind of community, and that was important back then. And I went up to you and introduced myself, and we've been friends ever since. But that Black community of booksellers was really important. I attended many events at Kuru, and you spoke about a renaissance of Black bookstores now. What do you see now that's different from 1997? So 1996, fast forward a quarter of a century later and more, what's the environment like, and how are you having an impact now? Fast forward so many years.
Just kind of go back a little bit about sharing that list. Back then, I didn't want to commodify anything. I didn't have a sense of what I was doing and its intrinsic value. It didn't have a monetary value when I started it. So I was just doing it out of love. There was no way to make money in the beginning. So this idea that I wouldn't talk about bookstores or other book clubs, it just didn't do, like they weren't competition. Like we were all in it trying to do the same thing, which was promote literature and reading. And the fact that I could then go and, you know, promote Nkeru or promote Black Books Plus, to me was part of the reason I started it. You know, I would travel from the Bronx all the way to Nkeru, and Nkeru would be empty, you know.
Yeah.
And I'm like wondering, like, you know, why aren't there more people in here? So I wanted to promote them, and I wanted, you know, more people to be in that bookstore, just like sort of basic reasons to be involved with any kind of community. It didn't dawn on me that, you know, so many years later, that little list that I started, you know, Oprah would be reposting and, you know, and it would be appearing all over the country, if not the world, that, you know, even now when I think about it, that no one had a list before me, it just seems so like unbelievable. But there was no, even though there was a Black book community, you know, we have to remember, like the quote that always makes me laugh, and it's probably not a quote, it's attributed to John Johnson, and him saying something like, oh, my people's like paper, they don't want to be on the interweb, you know. And it sounded crazy then, and it sounds crazy now, but that was the thinking of a lot of traditional spaces, you know. They didn't see the internet as this sort of viable alternative, or now pure competition that, you know, you know, physical bookstores really don't have to be concerned about the bookstore down the block. They have to be concerned about, you know, Amazon and all these other, you know, digital platforms that now compete with them. You know, the world has changed so much since we first met. And what was interesting about when we met, I was in Nkeru, again, traveling from the Bronx all the way to Nkeru to try to get them to sell Mosaic Magazine, which is a, you know, a separate thing. By then it's 98, 99, and I've already started a literary a physical print literary magazine called Mosaic. And I just happened to be in the store when you were in the store, and you were in the store with your oldest daughter, Maya. She was there also. And you know what's so interesting about that? You did something that I cannot say I would have done in reverse. We met and you invited me to your home right away. So the day we met, we walked to your home. You went to the cleaners, and then we went to your home. That alone struck me that, you know, you didn't know me from, I mean, we had a little 10-minute conversation in the store, and you were like, hey, I live up the block. You can, you know, come by, see my setup. We walked to your home and we talked about what we were doing, you know, because at that time, we were still kind of separate. We were living, even though we connected online, you had a website and I had a website. We didn't really physically know each other. So that expression of like camaraderie always kind of stuck with me.
Oh, okay. I appreciate that. I hadn't thought about that. And to me, it was a no-brainer. It's just that you know, we connected. We did have the connection through high school, and you know, again, online, you know, the way you presented online, you were like, you know, kindred spirits.
Yeah.
And personally, I just was happy to talk shop to somebody that would understand what the heck I'm doing.
Right.
Because the vast majority of people, you know, I couldn't talk to them about what I was doing on the web. It just, even to this day, that remains true.
Yeah.
And as we've evolved in what we're doing, and I have less opportunity to talk to you about books, Black books and technology, you know, so I do miss that part of our relationship. But you do still get it. So we can, you know, from time to time talk about what's going on in the world. And indeed, we looked at, I was thinking about sharing my screen just to bring up some of the covers of Mosaic Books magazine. Go ahead.
Yeah, that looks great. Troy has done a better job at archiving Mosaic than I have. So I don't have a page that looks like this, which really looks so rich and interesting. But yeah, so you see the at the bottom, if you scroll down, the second image from the left, that's the issue I was trying to
Oh,
get
wow.
Nkiru to cover to sell in their store. So we're talking about the third issue that I published. I believe that's the issue that I sort of went to them and was saying like, hey, can you guys carry the magazine? And they did, to their credit, a small bookstore. They did cover it. But yeah, this was the idea. The idea it's so funny because the original idea was to start like this little 8-page brochure that would be free. People could, pick it up when they walked into the store. And then I was really inspired by African Voices magazine and what they were doing, Carolyn Butts. And I decided to give it a shot to do a full magazine. And that's what came out of it. But yeah, definitely inspired by African Voices magazine. To a lesser extent, QBR Quarterly Black Review also. So, and then there were a few other magazines that were popping up here and there. But yeah, this is the issue that, it's so funny when you think back at it that I could have been like 10 minutes later on a train and completely missed you. And our lives may have taken like, different paths, you never know. So it's
You
just
never know.
interesting how things
But
happen.
yeah, I think it was just a matter of time. But I'm looking, this was fall of 1998. And it's interesting just to look at some of the authors who you've highlighted on the cover. I see, mentioned by name, but I see Waiting in Vain, Colin Channer, Gail Jones, and Edwidge Danticat, and Valerie Wilson Wesley, Veronica Chambers, and on. And it's, a lot of these authors are still writing, some aren't. I mean, but it's really a time capsule, and it kind of gives you a sense of what was going on in that period. And so I have the complete run of Mosaic magazine, and I was keen on promoting it. And indeed, looking at this cover of Kalisha Buchanan, she I'm publishing her work this year.
Now you're publishing her work. Yeah.
I'm actually publishing her book, and I discovered her through Mosaic Literary Magazine. And, she is an accomplished writer who, critically acclaimed and, just expressed an interest in ALBC publishing her work. But again, discovered her through Mosaic.
Yeah, and that's one of the things we've always tried to do. Of course, we have some, famous writers like Walter Dean Myers. He was well known with Gwendolyn Brooks, but like Tiari Jones, she only had one book out at the time, and but we recognize her as a sort of a would-be force as far as writing is concerned with her talent. So. And we were always like open to just putting anyone on not anyone on the cover, but we didn't care whether you had, 12 books out or one book. That really never mattered to us. We were just interested in covering like good literature. So.
Right, and that's what you've done. It struck me though, James Baldwin appeared. I think he's the only writer who's appeared on your cover twice. So you clearly have a strong affinity to Baldwin.
And you see right above Baldwin, go down to the other one. Yeah, so if you see right next to the right is Marcy Blackman. She's still writing. She's going to be in the next issue of Mosaic. So we were on hiatus for a little while. We're coming back as a print issue this year in November, and she's contributing to the issue. So again, it's just like this whole idea of like I never wanted to just cover somebody one time and never hear from them again. We wanted to be like a supportive platform in the lives of many writers. So even though, they don't appear on the cover, other than James Baldwin, more than once, we do try to stay connected to all the writers that we cover or have covered throughout the years.
Yeah, I have to say a lot of these covers are really striking, and actually looking at the Baldwin cover from the 1990s to the Baldwin cover and this is an impressive cover.
Yeah,
and you do all the design yourself?
Yeah. I designed and lay out all the issues. Up until this next issue, I also edited all the issues, but it's like, I can't do everything for my rest of my entire life. So oddly enough, the person next to James Baldwin, Mecca Jamila Sullivan, is editing the next issue.
Wow.
So again, that's how we try to, kind of keep that family connected. And the issue that she's editing will focus on queer Black writers. So it'll be a full issue of writers who are sort of writing in that genre or are themselves queer writers.
Wow. That's I mean, and again, you're giving that type of coverage, which may be more popular today. You always did that. I mean, you covered writers.
I was always interested in connecting the Black narrative, not defining it by any one thing. So not saying, you must be a Black male writer or you must be queer or fiction, nonfiction. I just wanted to cover good writers and, regardless of nationality, ethnicity, sexual orientation, that never sort of, it does play a part. Sometimes we do issues that are focused specifically, like the next issue will be focused specifically on queer writers, but it's now an annual, and the issue after that will probably focus on revolution and the different revolutions that we are living through, currently, whether it could be, queer rights, it could be social justice, it could be, the criminal justice system, all these sort of points of radical change that at least we think we're going through. I don't know if it really, how these things will manifest in the end, but right now, the plan is to do one issue a year of Mosaic and really just focus on a specific topic that is affecting us as a people.
Right. I mean, you're a literary activist and self-described as such. And I'm not sure you appreciate how revolutionary what you did in the mid-90s was, and how revolutionary what you continue to do is. I'm sure part of that is modesty. I'm not just using that word lightly, because you are a very modest person. You're not out there trying to be in the limelight, and you allow others to shine. Even doing something like this is not something that you push, and and which actually makes the recognition by the Hurston Wright Foundation so very important, because if we don't celebrate our own heroes and sheroes, who else is going to do it? I mean, it's changed, and that's one of the things that has changed. If you started a book website today, the New York Times is not going to cover your little book site. But when you did it, that type of coverage was warranted because it was different.
Yeah.
And I think that those differences, in order to continue to survive in this environment, you have to continue to evolve. And sometimes I think about, things like, cyber cryptocurrency and NFTs, or even the metaverse, probably more appropriately. People look today at the metaverse as the future, and you have to get on board. And do you feel the same way about the metaverse, this virtual reality environment, the way you did about the web in general?
I don't know enough. It's interesting that, so I started mosaicbooks.com, but it basically closed in 2014 or 16, somewhere around there. But since then, I haven't been so concerned with technology. I use technology every single day, but I'm more concerned, and this is, I'm going to loop back to the metaverse, but I've been trying to live in the real world, if you know what I mean. But the real world is, when your daughter is, ready for high school, I'm sure a portion of her life, whether it will be taking classes or hanging out with friends, will be in the metaverse. That's just how it's going to be. She'll be walking around with little goggles over her head, bumping into walls, but she'll be talking to her friends and she'll be taking a class. I don't know if I have enough capacity at my age to sort of like adopt another technology right now, particularly one that is so new and so unproven. And the internet was the same way, granted, when I started. So that's why I'm not like saying it won't exist. But for me personally, I hope that I can exist without the metaverse. But, Joy, that's going to be her life, so.
Right. So Ron is referring to a couple. I have a daughter that's 7 months old, and I also have a couple other daughters that are in the 30, basically. So
this is the man I'm talking to. This ain't no kid.
But that raises an interesting point, at least from my perspective. You spoke about that quote from John Johnson earlier, and you almost sound like John Johnson now relative to the metaverse. I mean,
I'm not against it. I'm not against it. So like John Johnson believed that Black people would never be on the internet, that they only wanted to read Ebony magazine in the paper form.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that. There will be people on the metaverse, and I acknowledge that. I'm not sure I will be one of the first ones in the way that I was one of the first ones with the internet. That's all I'm saying. So,
got it.
And I'm not even, I've recently been considering TikTok just as a way of marketing what I do. And that's like, do I really want to take on another platform and learn another, I hesitate, it's technology, but I hesitate to call it technology, but it's sort of social engagement that, these platforms sort of perpetuate. We'll see. We'll see.
I mean, it is technology, and it begs another question. You, again, what makes what you do so important is that you, and in fact, your quote, you work with, literature or books, culture, education, and you do that increasingly in the real world. And to my mind, that's exceedingly important, doing things in the real world, touching people, speaking to them, being in the same physical spaces with other people. I often have conversations with others talking about how I don't see kids playing outside like I used to. Just playing tag or just running around. And
that's for sure.
And so again, so it's part of your, it sounds like reluctance. There's a TikTok out there, but it doesn't seem like you're anxious to get on it.
No.
Your passion seems to be more with your book clubs,
Yeah.
your the things that you do in the real world, the print version of Mosaic, and
Yeah.
that's. Can you compare and contrast what you did online versus what you do in the real world?
The real world, and this is just going to sound almost like duh, but the real world is tangible. And you can definitely make tangible connections virtually. I don't want to sort of present it as though, if you are strictly on Zoom, you're wasting your time. We have a vibrant, growing community thanks to Zoom. But we had a community before Zoom. We had a community who came together every week to discuss books and ideas. We had a community that traveled, now that we're online, we regularly get people from all across the country. We've had people as far as Brazil, Nigeria, Switzerland, join, but when we meet in person, we have people who come, of course, from the Bronx. We're based in the Bronx, but Brooklyn, Staten Island, all the 5 boroughs. We used to have somebody who would come from like Westchester. So there's a need for people to get together. Like we are, even though, like you said, a few minutes ago, I am not the most social person. I'm kind of I would much rather be in the background than up front. But I'm at the people ask me to step up and be in the front. By all means, I want to do that. But I do recognize that there are a lot of people who forget the quarantine and the pandemic. Before that, who wanted to be together, who wanted to have a place to discuss ideas, and who I don't want to equate this as being like in a club, but we do have people who develop relationships, not in that kind of romantic relationships, but they network and they become friends and families, and we have husbands and wives coming together in our book club. We've had a couple babies born while we were meeting in our book club. So, and anytime you just having a baby, they become the center of attention. Like, people want to know what you're doing socially, not in a private way, but if you have children, or you have a college graduate, or if you're having health issues, there's a community who wants to be there for you. And in person, that has really struck me. Like, every so often, I'll hear something and I'm like, wait a minute, those people are hanging out on the weekend or going on vacation and they met in my book club. It feels good, like, putting humility aside, it feels good when you help sort of develop and sustain those kinds of relationships.
Good. Yeah. And as you mentioned the word love in the context of sharing that bookstore listing, but I think that's, that runs throughout everything that you do.
Yeah.
And it's evident. And it's absolutely part of the reason why you are a winner and you have been a recipient of the Hurston Wright Merit Award. And
Yeah.
it's well deserved. And I was excited to learn about it myself and see your efforts recognized after over a quarter century of what I describe as being in the trenches and doing the work, and that's important. So I applaud you, I applaud Hurston Wright. I enjoyed this time. We can go on forever about books and technology and the impact of social media. We've had this conversation ongoing for a number of years. But again, we do have to wrap. Is there anything that you'd like to say before we go?
Yeah, absolutely. So just want to thank you, Troy, for all you contribute to literature and the community, but also just for being a good friend, all of these years. Like I said, it was literal coincidence that I bumped into Troy, and we've been friends ever since that first time we met. So again, thank you so much, Troy. But most importantly, thank you, Hurston Wright. Like you said, I just sort of try to do the work and hope the work will kind of speak for itself. And to have an organization as prestigious as Hurston Wright, kind of like, hey, along with Elizabeth Alexander and the other recipient to put me in their category, it feels unbelievable that I would be, in that category, but also, just the idea that my work has been recognized and acknowledged by Hurston Wright it's definitely, what do they call that, a feather in your cap or something like that. It's one of those things that like really stands out, and I've been trying to tell other people and promote it, and so because I'm really, really proud of it. So thank you to Hurston Wright also for acknowledging the work.
Yeah, brilliant. And one other little factoid, Ron Kavanaugh actually designed the BC's logo. I mean, it's the designer, technologist, editor, publisher, founder of foundations, the list goes on. A true Renaissance man. It's not even an exaggeration. So thank you all for listening. Thank you, Hurston Wright, for providing this platform. And thank you for encouraging and celebrating Black literature.